Rain threaded the tall windows of Whitcomb House like restless fingers, tapping softly against the glass as though the night itself wished to overhear what would unfold inside. Candles trembled in their silver stands, bending light across the long mahogany table where crystal and porcelain waited untouched. Servants hovered in doorways, trained into stillness, their lowered gazes disguising curiosity that breathed through the room like perfume. At the table's center sat Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, eldest daughter of the house, her posture composed, her hands folded with quiet precision atop dove-gray silk. Her dark hair was parted severely, smoothed into a modest knot that revealed a thoughtful brow and observant eyes. She listened more than she spoke, and tonight she listened to the rain, to the clock, to the unsteady breathing of her mother across from her. Beside Eleanor glowed Lydia, younger by 2 years and brighter by nature, dressed in pale rose satin that caught candlelight eagerly. Auburn curls framed her cheeks, and her laughter, when it appeared, chimed like glass stirred by a spoon. She possessed the easy grace that invited admiration without effort, and tonight her smile seemed arranged carefully, as though awaiting a moment rehearsed in secret. At the far end of the table sat Mr. Edmund Harrow, recently returned from London, regarded already as a gentleman of intelligence and sober charm. His black coat lay immaculate against broad shoulders, his expression thoughtful, almost solemn, as though he carried words too heavy for casual conversation. He had dined here twice before, and on both occasions Eleanor had noticed how attentively he listened when she spoke. Supper progressed with polite exchanges that never settled. Forks touched plates without appetite, glasses were lifted and replaced without thirst. Conversation circled trivialities, yet tension gathered like gathering storm clouds beneath the ceiling's painted cherubs. Eleanor sensed it in the stiffness of her father's shoulders and in Lydia's expectant stillness. When dessert arrived untouched, Edmund placed his napkin beside his plate with deliberate calm. The small sound commanded attention more effectively than a raised voice. Every gaze turned toward him, including Eleanor's, though hers remained discreet, almost cautious. He inhaled once, steadying himself as though about to step into cold water. "I must confess," he began, his tone courteous yet weighted, "that my visits here have not been guided solely by friendship." Lydia's fingers tightened around her spoon. Eleanor felt her own pulse slow, not quicken. The rain seemed louder, striking the windows in sudden urgency. "It is your sister," Edmund said, turning toward Lydia with open sincerity, "for whom my affections have grown most earnestly." Silence fell with physical weight. Mrs. Whitcomb's breath caught audibly. Lydia's cheeks flushed rose upon rose. Eleanor lowered her eyes to her untouched plate. No one spoke. The confession lingered like smoke refusing to clear. Eleanor sensed expectation turning toward her, as though elder sisterhood required a visible reaction. She lifted her gaze calmly and met Edmund's hopeful expression without accusation, without surprise. "Oh," she said softly, the single syllable floating gently between them, "she did not tell you?" Confusion flickered across Edmund's features. Lydia's smile faltered almost invisibly. Mr. Whitcomb cleared his throat, uncertain whether to interpret the remark as wit or wound. Conversation resumed awkwardly, forced into motion by parental insistence and social habit. Compliments were offered, futures politely imagined, and Lydia accepted congratulations with trembling delight. Eleanor contributed nothing, yet her silence spoke with unsettling clarity that Edmund could not ignore. Soon chairs scraped softly against carpet, signaling the evening's reluctant end. Servants reappeared like cautious ghosts to clear what had never been eaten. Lydia was surrounded instantly by maternal fussing and paternal approval, leaving Eleanor momentarily unobserved. She rose with measured grace and slipped from the dining room into the dim corridor, where candlelight thinned into shadow. The house exhaled differently here, free from watchful eyes and strained civility. Rain murmured along the roof like distant applause. Behind her came the measured tread of Edmund's boots upon polished wood. He paused a respectful distance away, as though uncertain whether pursuit would offend. Eleanor did not turn immediately, allowing the quiet to settle between them. "Miss Whitcomb," he began gently, "I hope my news did not cause you distress." His voice carried genuine concern, unguarded and searching. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, gathering composure like a shawl around her shoulders. She turned then, meeting his gaze fully for the first time that evening. Candlelight revealed neither resentment nor sorrow in her expression, only a quiet gravity that unsettled him more than tears might have. "You have been most cruel tonight, sir," she said with impeccable calm, her voice scarcely above a whisper, "though not in the way you imagine." Edmund stared at her, comprehension distant as thunder beyond hills. Before he could question her, voices echoed from the dining room, calling his name with celebratory warmth. The spell fractured. Eleanor inclined her head politely, already retreating behind practiced composure. "Good evening, Mr. Harrow." She moved past him toward the staircase, her steps unhurried yet irrevocable. Edmund remained where he stood, watching the gentle sway of gray silk disappear into shadow, troubled by a meaning he could not grasp. Above, a door opened and closed, followed by the faint hush of movement across carpet. The house resumed its ordinary breathing, yet something essential had shifted within its walls, subtle as a portrait hung slightly askew. Edmund returned slowly to the dining room, where Lydia awaited him with shining expectation. He answered her smile absently, his thoughts lingering in the corridor's dimness and in Eleanor's unsettling words. Throughout the remainder of the evening, he found himself listening for her voice that did not return, wondering what truth had trembled beneath her composure. Rain continued its patient tapping, as though keeping time with his unease. Long after farewells were exchanged and carriages called, Edmund stepped into the wet night carrying not triumph but a question that followed him like a shadow. What had Lydia not told him? Morning arrived pale and uncertain over Whitcomb House, carrying tension. Servants moved quietly, sensing unease lingering like perfume in corridors. Eleanor descended the staircase with measured grace and unreadable composure. Lydia already waited below, humming softly beside the breakfast table. Their mother watched both daughters with anxious, calculating maternal attention. No one mentioned dinner, yet its silence occupied every thought. A knock interrupted the fragile calm echoing through the hallway. A delivery boy stood outside, soaked from rain, clutching flowers. The bouquet overflowed with ivory roses, tied using satin ribbon. Eleanor accepted them before Lydia could step forward eagerly brightly. A sealed envelope rested discreetly among the stems, bearing handwriting. Lydia smiled expectantly, assuming admiration had arrived for her again. Eleanor recognized the script immediately and felt breath leave quietly. She slipped the envelope free with calm, careful practiced indifference. Lydia chattered cheerfully, unaware sudden observation had sharpened into dread. Eleanor opened the note beside the window where light gathered. The first line referenced a conversation held privately weeks earlier. It described dawn roses and thoughtful remarks Eleanor remembered clearly. No one else had stood there during that quiet exchange. Lydia's name appeared below, claiming affection never meant for her. Eleanor folded the letter carefully before Lydia could notice change. She handed flowers across with a gentle, calm, unreadable expression. Lydia inhaled their scent with theatrical pleasure and bright triumph. Their mother beamed, seeing romance blossom exactly as she hoped. Eleanor excused herself politely, retreating toward the drawing-room fireplace. Flames consumed the letter while her face remained perfectly composed. Yet she rescued one fallen petal before it touched embers. She pressed it between book pages with quiet, trembling deliberation. That small act felt dangerously private, intimate, almost like confession. Outside, carriage wheels passed, carrying gossip already forming beyond walls. By afternoon, whispers followed Eleanor through garden paths and corridors. Neighbors had noticed Edmund's frequent visits and Lydia's visible delight. They concluded Eleanor must surely envy such romantic attention deeply. Eleanor walked slowly among roses, absorbing judgment without outward reaction. Petals brushed her sleeves like sympathetic gestures from silent companions. She wondered how misunderstanding could bloom faster than genuine understanding. The thought lingered painfully, like perfume softly refusing to fade. Church bells rang distantly, summoning solemn parishioners toward afternoon prayers. Eleanor attended dutifully, knowing absence would invite cruel fresh speculation. Lydia arrived radiant, greeted warmly by many curious, approving smiles. Edmund stood near the chapel doors, removing his gloves thoughtfully. His gaze found Eleanor first, though Lydia stood much closer. He approached Eleanor with grateful warmth she could not return. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for encouraging Lydia's affections kindly." Eleanor felt the word strike deeper than any deliberate cruelty. "You mistake kindness for permission, Mr. Harrow," she replied softly. Confusion clouded his expression as though thin fog passed briefly. Lydia joined them cheerfully, linking her waiting arm through Edmund's. Eleanor stepped aside, feeling invisible within public admiration surrounding them. The organ began playing, drowning thoughts she dared not voice. After prayers, congregants gathered outside beneath gray overcast, watchful skies. Conversations paused whenever Eleanor passed, then resumed in low whispers. She carried herself with calm dignity that silenced open cruelty. Lydia accepted compliments with smiling ease and light careless laughter. Edmund watched Eleanor occasionally as if puzzling through recent memory. Something unsettled him, though he could not yet name it. A servant from Whitcomb House approached him respectfully quietly then. "Sir," he said, bowing slightly, "a small useful clarification perhaps." Edmund listened politely, unaware the importance balanced within casual words. Eleanor paused nearby, her heart suddenly loud within quiet chest. "You admire early dawn walks, sir," the servant began carefully. "Miss Whitcomb keeps that quiet habit faithfully every morning alone." Edmund frowned slightly, recalling words he had written very recently. "The roses there are quite remarkable," the servant continued. "Indeed." Realization moved slowly across Edmund's face like cold winter sunrise. He glanced toward Lydia, then back toward Eleanor silently again. Memory rearranged itself with sudden alarming, undeniable clarity inside him. Conversations, glances, shared remarks aligned into full new painful understanding. Eleanor met his gaze briefly, unable to disguise the truth. Neither spoke, yet silence thundered louder than those church bells. Lydia laughed nearby, unaware foundations beneath her now shifting dangerously. Edmund thanked the servant distractedly and dismissed him gently away. His thoughts turned inward, circling Eleanor's quiet-spoken words repeatedly. "She did not tell you," echoed now with startling significance. Shame crept across his conscience like ink spreading through water. He recalled Eleanor's restraint, her quiet composure, her unfathomable dignity. Understanding dawned that he had wounded the wrong sister deeply. Lydia approached him, smiling, asking about their evening plans cheerfully. He answered politely, though thoughts remained elsewhere, very entirely unsettled. Eleanor stepped toward the carriage, preparing for silent departure home. Edmund watched her closely, noticing small details previously overlooked carelessly. The way she avoided attention now appeared deliberate, protective, painful. He remembered praising such modest habits in recent heartfelt correspondence. Heat rose to his face despite the cool afternoon air. Guilt pressed heavily against ribs with sharp, unfamiliar, unwelcome force. Eleanor sensed his stare but quietly refused to acknowledge it. The carriage door opened with soft hollow finality echoing nearby. Lydia waved cheerfully from steps, oblivious to the silent transformation. Edmund bowed politely, hiding turmoil beneath his practiced social composure. Wheels began turning, carrying Eleanor away with heavy unspoken truths. Edmund remained standing long after the carriage disappeared completely down. The sky darkened slightly, mirroring understanding settling slowly within him. He replayed every conversation shared beneath those roses weeks earlier. Each memory now carried Eleanor's voice, not Lydia's bright laughter. The truth felt humiliating, yet clarifying beyond any comfortable denial. He understood suddenly whom he had truly admired all along. Eleanor's quiet dignity rose before him with clear, painful brilliance. Her words returned, echoing through conscience with sharp, relentless clarity. "You have been most cruel tonight, sir," she had said. And now he finally understood precisely what she truly meant. Dawn arrived veiled in silver mist, laying a hush upon the Whitcomb gardens that felt almost sacred. Roses bowed beneath dew like penitents awaiting forgiveness. Eleanor moved along the gravel path with habitual quiet, her gray shawl gathered neatly against the chill. Morning was the only hour when the world did not look at her with expectation. Here, she could breathe without judgment pressing upon her shoulders. She paused beside the oldest rosebush, touching its petals with familiar gentleness. The scent steadied her thoughts, anchoring composure that daylight would soon demand again. Footsteps sounded behind her, careful yet unmistakably purposeful through the fog. She did not turn immediately, knowing already who approached. Edmund stopped several paces away, respecting invisible boundaries she carried around herself. For a moment neither spoke, and the silence felt honest rather than strained. Birds stirred lightly within hedges, punctuating stillness with fragile life. Eleanor finally faced him, her expression composed though faintly weary. He removed his hat, holding it uncertainly against his chest. "Miss Whitcomb," he began softly, voice stripped of social confidence, "I ask forgiveness for disturbing your solitude." She inclined her head politely, granting permission without offering welcome. The mist wrapped them in privacy no drawing room could provide. "I have been blind," Edmund continued, words emerging with difficult clarity. "Every conversation I cherished, every thought I admired belonged to you." Eleanor's gaze did not waver, yet something fragile moved behind her eyes. She folded her hands carefully, guarding herself from visible reaction. "It is not blindness to trust what one is shown, sir," she replied gently. "My sister presented herself honestly enough for your understanding." His brow tightened with regret he no longer concealed. "But I wrote to her what I meant for you," he said quietly. "I praised habits, words, sentiments that were never hers to receive." A faint tremor crossed Eleanor's lips before discipline reclaimed her. "You owe Lydia no humiliation for an error kindly made," she answered. "Society is unkind to women whose reputations fray even slightly." Edmund stepped closer, compelled by emotion stronger than propriety. "And what of your reputation, Miss Whitcomb?" he asked earnestly. "You have borne this misunderstanding in silence to protect hers." She turned slightly toward the roses, avoiding intensity within his searching gaze. "A sister's dignity is often purchased with her own," she said calmly. The admission lingered between them like breath on cold air. Edmund reached into his coat pocket with hesitant deliberation. From within he withdrew a pressed rose petal, faded but intact. Eleanor's composure faltered visibly as she recognized it at once. "You burned my letter," he said softly, "but you kept this." She stared at the fragile keepsake resting in his gloved palm. "No," she whispered, voice barely audible above rustling leaves. "You kept it." Their eyes met with understanding deeper than apology could mend. The petal symbolized memory neither could deny now. Emotion moved through the space like sunlight struggling through fog. Neither reached to take it, yet its presence altered everything. "I admired your mind before I knew your face," Edmund confessed quietly. "And I mistook admiration for convenience." Eleanor inhaled slowly, steadying herself against rising feeling. "Please, Mr. Harrow, do not speak what cannot be easily unsaid." His expression revealed turmoil she had not witnessed before. "Truth demands to be spoken even when late," he insisted gently. She shook her head as if refusing hope more than argument. "Truth spoken publicly may ruin Lydia," she said with painful restraint. "I will not allow that burden to fall upon her." Her loyalty humbled him further than any accusation could. Footsteps suddenly crunched upon gravel beyond the misted hedges. Eleanor stiffened, recognizing the light rhythm of Lydia's walk instantly. Edmund glanced toward the sound, anxiety crossing his features. Lydia emerged from the fog like a figure summoned by conscience. Her expression shifted rapidly from curiosity to sharp suspicion. She took in the closeness between them with widening eyes. "I wondered where you had gone so early," she said lightly, though her voice trembled. Eleanor stepped back immediately, restoring formal distance between herself and Edmund. The moment's intimacy dissolved beneath Lydia's watchful gaze. Edmund cleared his throat, struggling for composure before her scrutiny. Lydia's eyes moved from his troubled expression to Eleanor's pale calm. "You rise early for roses, sister," she remarked pointedly. Eleanor nodded once, unable to fabricate casual reply. Lydia's smile tightened, no longer warm but edged with uncertainty. "Mr. Harrow, you look as though you have seen a ghost," she added. He hesitated, searching for words that would not wound. "I have seen clarity," he answered carefully, though Lydia clearly misunderstood. Eleanor sensed the air thickening with tension neither could escape. Silence fell heavily again, this time sharp with awareness. Lydia studied them both, sensing something unspoken passing invisibly between. Edmund still held the pressed petal in his hand unconsciously. Lydia noticed it instantly, recognition flashing across her features. "Where did you find that?" she asked quietly, suspicion now unmistakable. Edmund glanced at Eleanor, then back at Lydia slowly. The question hung dangerously in the cool morning air. Eleanor realized concealment could not endure much longer now. Her heart beat loudly against ribs trained for composure. She feared the truth more than humiliation itself. Lydia stepped closer, eyes narrowing as understanding crept painfully inward. Edmund lowered his gaze, unable to fabricate comforting deceit. Eleanor spoke first, her voice calm despite rising dread. "It is nothing that need concern you, Lydia," she said gently. But Lydia's expression had changed irrevocably, bright innocence replaced by dawning alarm. The mist began lifting slowly, exposing them to widening daylight. With it came the certainty that secrecy could not survive. Lydia looked between them once more, then whispered hoarsely, "You spoke with him before me, didn't you?" And Eleanor, unable to lie, did not answer.
Afternoon light filtered weakly through the drawing-room curtains, casting long pale bands across polished floors that felt like silent accusations. Eleanor stood near the window with hands clasped, listening to the murmur of raised voices echoing from the corridor. Lydia had rushed inside moments earlier, her composure shattered, her steps uneven with agitation. Edmund followed shortly after, removing his hat with solemn deliberation that suggested battle rather than courtesy. Their mother hovered anxiously between doorways, while their father remained rigid beside the mantel, already sensing scandal forming beneath his roof. Lydia entered first, cheeks flushed and eyes bright with distressed indignation. "I demand an explanation," she said, her voice trembling not with sorrow but wounded pride. Eleanor turned slowly, her expression composed though fatigue lined her features. Edmund stepped into the room behind Lydia, closing the door firmly as though sealing them into unavoidable truth. Silence thickened, pressing against walls decorated with ancestral portraits. Every painted gaze seemed to judge the living with cold historical severity. "It is I who must speak," Edmund began, his tone measured yet urgent. Mr. Whitcomb nodded stiffly, granting reluctant permission. Lydia folded her arms, watching him with defensive anticipation. Eleanor lowered herself into a nearby chair, sensing that standing would betray weakness. The room felt smaller than usual, air thinner, propriety strained beyond comfort. "I have made a grave error," Edmund said, looking first at Eleanor, then at Lydia. "One born not of deceit, but misunderstanding I failed to question." Lydia's breath quickened, confusion turning rapidly toward alarm. "You have done nothing but express honorable affection," she insisted quickly. Edmund shook his head gently, refusing the easier path she offered. "The affection I expressed," he continued, "was never meant for you." The words struck the room with startling force. Mrs. Whitcomb gasped softly. Mr. Whitcomb's hand tightened against the mantel edge. Lydia stared at Edmund as though language itself had betrayed her. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, bracing for impact she had long feared. Edmund stepped forward, courage hardening within his posture. "Every conversation I treasured, every sentiment I admired, belonged to Miss Eleanor." Lydia's face drained of color, replaced by disbelief edged with humiliation. "That is impossible," she whispered sharply. "You courted me openly." "I mistook circumstance for clarity," Edmund replied firmly. "And she protected your dignity at great cost to her own." Lydia turned slowly toward Eleanor, betrayal rising like heat from stone. "You allowed this," she accused, voice cracking. Eleanor met her gaze with gentle sorrow. "I allowed nothing, Lydia. I endured what I believed would pass harmlessly." Her calm only deepened Lydia's agitation. "You always speak as though you suffer nobly," Lydia snapped. "As though I am incapable of sincerity." Their mother stepped forward anxiously. "This conversation serves no purpose but disgrace," she pleaded. But Edmund raised a hand respectfully, asking permission to continue. "It serves the purpose of truth, madam," he said. "And truth must correct what error created." Mr. Whitcomb watched him with stern, calculating eyes. "And what correction do you propose, sir?" he asked coldly. Edmund inhaled once, steadying himself for declaration that would echo beyond this room. "I ask permission to court Miss Eleanor properly and publicly." Silence followed so complete it seemed to swallow sound entirely. Lydia staggered back a step, as though struck physically. Eleanor's breath caught despite disciplined restraint. Mrs. Whitcomb looked between her daughters with dawning horror. "Society will not forgive such confusion," she whispered. "They will say we encouraged deception." Edmund's voice grew stronger, unwavering. "Then let society witness my correction openly, without shame or secrecy." Lydia's eyes filled not with tears, but with burning resentment. "You humiliate me before my own family," she said hoarsely. Edmund's expression softened, though resolve remained unshaken. "I humiliated you unknowingly before the world. I will not repeat that sin knowingly here." Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, moved by words she had never expected to hear aloud. "Please," she said quietly, "do not sacrifice peace for my sake." Edmund turned toward her with quiet intensity. "Peace built on falsehood is no peace at all, Miss Whitcomb." Mr. Whitcomb paced once across the carpet, struggling between pride and propriety. "This will become gossip before sunset," he muttered. "Neighbors already speculate." Edmund straightened his shoulders. "Then I shall give them something honorable to speak of instead." Lydia stepped backward toward the doorway, her composure unraveling visibly now. "I will not remain here to be pitied," she said through clenched breath. She turned abruptly and left the room, the door closing harder than decorum allowed. The sound echoed like final punctuation across strained silence. Mrs. Whitcomb followed anxiously, leaving the three remaining figures suspended in emotional aftermath. Eleanor stared at the carpet, overwhelmed by consequences unfolding rapidly beyond control. Edmund moved closer, though still maintaining respectful distance. "I will repair what I have broken," he said gently. Mr. Whitcomb studied him long, measuring sincerity against potential scandal. Finally, he spoke with reluctant gravity. "You may call tomorrow evening, Mr. Harrow." "Publicly." Edmund bowed his head deeply. "Thank you, sir." As he departed, Eleanor remained standing, feeling the room tilt beneath her steady feet. She had spent days protecting Lydia from disgrace, only to watch truth unravel everything anyway. Yet within that unraveling came something fragile and unexpected. Dignity restored not through silence, but through courage spoken aloud. From upstairs, a door slammed sharply, followed by hurried footsteps pacing. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, knowing Lydia's grief had turned toward something darker than sorrow. The house no longer felt merely tense. It felt on the verge of fracture. And for the first time, Eleanor feared not gossip, but what her sister might do next.